Hi, everyone. While we're sad to not see you in person at ALA Midwinter this year, thank you so much for joining us today for this very special author event. I'm Connie Hsu, Executive Editor at Roaring Brook Press, and I'm thrilled to introduce LeUyen Pham, author of Outside Inside, a beautiful new picture book that just went on sale January 5th. Wynn has illustrated more than 100 books for children, including the 2020 Caldecott Honor book Bear Came Along by Richard T. Morris and the best-selling Princess in Black series by Shannon and Dean Hale. She is the co-creator, along with Shannon Hale, of the best-selling graphic memoirs Real Friends and Best Friends. And I'm excited to share that the newest book in that series, Friends Forever, will be coming out August 2021. So Wynn, thank you so much for joining us at Coffee Talk.
Thank you guys for having me. And I feel like it's supposed to be coffee talk and I don't have my coffee, which is driving me a little crazy because I always need my coffee.
Sure. So, I have LaCroix. Does that count? No? Okay.
Anything would work right now. It's all right. I'm just virtually jealous of all you out there drinking coffee right now and watching me try to stagger through this without coffee. So let's go for it.
When you can do anything, you can do truly anything. And I think that this book is an example of how you can do truly anything, because back earlier in spring of 2020, when a lot of us were still sort of in shock and in our pajamas, looking at our laptops, you were absorbing and taking in the world around you. So how did the idea first come about? And, was it even a book when the idea started forming?
Yeah, gosh. I've been answering a lot of questions about this book, and everyone keeps asking this question, and I'm struggling in my mind to reconstruct the exact history of what went on.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone remembers those first early days of the lockdown. Everything was hazy. We couldn't quite believe what was going on. The idea of masks seemed so foreign. I remember like my son screaming, saying he didn't want to put it on his face. The idea that everyone was going to be staying home. And the crazy thought was that this was only going to last a short while. We only had to do this for a short while. And it sort of kept going and going. And I just remember in those early days, not knowing how to feel. And I'm sure everyone feels this. Just we were walking around our neighborhood because that was pretty much all we could do. And I think the early inklings of how this book came about was I started to notice how people were interacting with each other on the streets. And it's a weird idea, right? You're walking on the streets, you've got a mask on, you're huddled with your family. In the early days, the rules were really vague about how close you could stand to somebody and where you could be. And there's the whole issue of like slipstream, not standing behind someone who just ridden their bike because the air could blow in your face. It was so confusing. And so in general, you avoided everyone. But in the weirdest way, I felt like, I don't know if it was the same for you, but the more that we were avoiding people, the more we were in contact with people. Like to make certain that that person across the street knew that I was acknowledging them, I would, forcefully wave my hand and say hello very clearly so they could see that I was acknowledging them. Because normally you would just walk past the street, brush past them and not even glance at them. But there was something important about making that connection, about people understanding that we could still see each other and that we could see each other better than we used to. And I think that was when I started to first feel that sense of community, like a real sense of community. And I mean, I know you live in New York and I live in Los Angeles, and our neighborhoods in Los Angeles, the houses are big, the yards are big. You don't have to run into anybody if you don't want to. You could spend your entire day in the largest city in the world and not see a single person. And what was great about this was you wanted to see people, you couldn't get near them, and you were this effort, this desire to connect. There was just something about that was just so lovely. I mean, I don't know how you must have felt about it in New York. It must have been the same for you guys. And
for sure, you forget that even if people are strangers, their presence around you and in your circles, on your commute to work or going up the elevator to the office, like we're animals and we were accustomed to that, of living, breathing peers among us, and then to suddenly be told to sort of be afraid of them, felt anti, like why I moved to New York to be in this busy place. So, and I think that it, regardless of whether or not you take public transport, there are so many touchstones of everyone's day to day that they're connecting with other people. And so when that got disrupted, it felt like we were trying to find new ways to connect. So,
And that,
um,
I feel like that's what
yeah,
happened. We were on the outside. What was happening outside was suddenly I was trying to connect with people. And then
yeah,
you'd go inside and what you would spend your like, I just spent my days. I know I had work. I was supposed to be doing something. I was supposed to be working on a book. But your mind wouldn't stop. And
yeah,
you're online all day and you're reading about what's going on and what all this means. And I think for me, what I couldn't get over was how the rest of the world was responding. Like within our circle, within our house, we were okay. And
yeah,
you take assessment, you check where you are, we were fine. I wasn't worried, I wasn't upset, I wasn't for my immediate circle, I was fine. But the more I was reading online, the more I was seeing, and I don't know, I don't think I was trying to make a book. I think I was just trying to understand what was going on. And you're looking at video footage of what's going on in the hospitals and how the nurses and doctors are being inundated with so much. And then you would look at other countries and how other countries were dealing with it. And I kept thinking,
mhm,
my God, we had it bad. In China, you couldn't go out and walk your dog for an entire month. People had
no,
to train their dogs to poop in the corner. I saw pictures like of what was going on in India where there was military armed guards like waiting outside with guns, making sure that people stayed indoors. And all of this was being absorbed over like a 3 or 4 week period of time.
yeah,
And I think during that time, there must have been a lot of overreaction around the world. Everyone I knew in the writing world wanted to write something, wanted to say something about, let's explain what coronavirus is, it's like just to give out information.
mhm,
And at some point, I think my brain overloaded with what I was seeing outside, with the connection I was feeling in this
mhm,
isolated community, and what I was seeing inside on the computer and with my own family, and what was going on everywhere. And they just overwhelmed my brain, and I couldn't do anything else. And I don't think I've ever quite felt this way before. I don't think anyone's ever felt this way before, but I had never felt so overwhelmed by what was going on inside my head that I had to put it down. I had to get it out. And it was, I know you remember this, it was a mess. It was a jumble. And this is where Connie enters the story, where I called her and I said, look, I have visions. I have something that I want to say about all of this. And I don't know what it is yet. And I can't even recall in that first conversation what I said to you. I can't even believe that you were listening to me, because I remember the only thing I remember clearly was you saying, look, you need some time. Everyone's like responding with crazy coronavirus stories. Like there's no distance yet. You have to, if you're going to do something, it has to be different than what other people are writing. And I remember not knowing what you were talking about because I could only see what I was seeing. And I didn't understand how everyone else was responding to this. But this was what I saw, these images and these moments. And they were things that were disconnected that I had to find a way to connect and to present to you. I don't know.
yeah. It was the way you were totally right. I had a lot of reservation about a book about the pandemic because of the submissions I'd seen. And I felt like they tended to only tell the author's experience, oh, I'm inside. Oh, our kids are also inside. And so, how are we going to cope with putting our lives on pause? Or it was, as you pointed out, more nonfiction. What is the coronavirus? What just giving information to help kids, understand the situation better. And I felt like when you started saying, I see this as a contemplation of what's going on outside and what's going on inside, and how a person experiences the news they're hearing, what they're seeing, what they're, and how it changes them on the inside. But we're also physically inside, not able to interact outside, but outside the world is still changing. Like you probably don't remember, you're babbling. You were just like talking all about the concept. And that was when I was like, oh, this is different. This isn't just about, when walking through the neighborhood with her family. That was only a part of it. And then you started to bring in um, absorb real life events, stories from your friends, stories from the news, and those became part of it. And I thought, this captures the emotional experience of the pandemic, because it's not just somebody who isn't going to school or going to work. It's not just about the frontline workers. It's about all of it coming together, and what it's like to know that everyone is experiencing this in the same way, but also experiencing this differently based on their profession or based on their economic circumstances. And when you sent in your dummy, and it covered as many experiences as possible, and I know you say that your author's note you wish you could have done way more, but there would be like a volume this big. It was 11 o'clock at night. You sent it, and I just opened it up right away, and I remember crying, because it was the first time I felt like all of the conflicting emotions I was feeling was finally put to paper. And I was so grateful that you were able to do that.
Thank you. I I again, I whenever I look back, I get emotional, I get teary, and I don't want to keep crying at all these interviews because they get old. I don't want to keep crying about this. But there was something I remember that when I got off the phone with you that first time, and what happened, I think, was that I've been making how many books for how many years? Over 100 books for 20
Yeah.
years. And so my brain automatically processes things in that way. And I just remember getting off the phone with you and feeling more of a sense of, okay, focus. Like, let's channel all this down. There's too much now to do. And finding a pattern in the use of the words on the inside, on the outside, on the inside, on the outside, and repeating it. And then remembering that there is the overall message that is accumulating at the end of all of this. So you've got
Yeah.
what's happening outside, what's happening inside, what's happening outside, what's happening inside, who we are on the outside and who we are on the inside. And that was the message I realized that's what I'm moving towards, that in
Yeah.
the chaos of this world. And remember, this was back in the spring. This was before elections. This was when everything crazy was happening. Everyone is still so angry. And I mean, everyone still is so angry. But um, that that feeling, especially as an artist, that you want to bring people together, that you want to see the world like the way a child does, and just get over your fight already. Let's all get along. We're all the same inside. Like,
Yeah.
when I realized that, okay, that's the message I'm moving towards with this idea of outside, inside, outside, inside. It culminated in that final spread where you've got um, the outside kids from all around the world. And I made sure, particularly for this book, and I remember you saying, you have to include every perspective out there. This is not a book about California. This is not a book about New York. And I remember on that spread, there are children from all around the world, all styles of homes and houses, um, and you see them from the outside. And on the outside, we are all different. And the next spread is everyone in shadow and everyone's heart lit up.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the inside, we're all the same. And
Yeah.
that was when I realized that's what we're trying to say. And that's the message that's going to be beyond this. This book isn't about the virus. It's not about lockdown. It's about this particular moment in which we tested ourselves and discovered our humanity, and discovered, the child in all of us, that we are truly all the same inside. And
Mhm.
and that for me was the crux of the book. And I think once that message was
Yeah.
understood, it was a lot easier to go forward with the book. It was a lot easier to move forward and figure out what to put in.
It came in like that too, your original dummy. Like, we made some small tweaks back and forth, but I remember as I was flipping through the dummy and it built towards that moment, I got goosebumps, just because it was, where does this go? Where does this outside, inside go? And in a way, the best ideas are the ones that are sort of, in a way, like immediate. Like, oh, hey, cat. And speaking of cats,
And she was supposed to be in the book, but we turned her black, so she's easier to show up in the book.
but I guess we could quickly talk a bit about. I know you've been asked before, but why the cat? Why a cat? And what was the purpose of having the cat throughout?
You were the first person to ask me that. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh,
But
it's a blur.
yeah, I know, it's all a blur. And it was funny. So the idea of doing a children's book for me, I always try to find ways in which children can enter the book in sort of a safe way. And so you always need some sort of consistency in each of the pages. And here's a book where you're showing about things that are going on around the world that are not terribly pleasant. I'm showing literally death scenes and people who are dying. And how do you make this accessible to a kid? And not even to a kid, even to adults, just to find
Yeah.
not, it's not to make it palatable, to make it in a way soothing, to
Yeah.
find an easier way to enter. And all at first I thought, well, I'm going to put a little girl on each of these pages and she's going to be me and I'm going to carry through. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't put a human face because a human face is subject immediately to judgment, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, the way she's dressed, that means she's well taken care of. Oh, the way she's dressed, that means she's poor. So you
Mhm.
immediately cast judgment on it. So it
Yeah.
had to be an animal. And once I knew it had to be an animal, this was a little more organic, but I realized the cat was the perfect vehicle because the cat is the one animal that can go inside and outside
That's true.
liberty. And once I understood that it could roam the world, you know, at its will, it had to be the creature that carried you through this entire book was
Yeah.
why it's not a little striped tabby like my sardine. It's simply because the book is painted overall in lots of varying grays, and it moves from um, really saturated, bright first image to immediately everything graying out, which was, I think, how we all felt like everything
Hmm.
dimmed in our lives. And so I had all these early washes of gray. And as the book continues and we sort of understand what's going on in the world better and we start to accept and acclimate to it, the world gets a little brighter and it moves from winter towards spring.
Hmm.
By the final spread, everything is in full color.
Hmm.
And so my little cat had to be black because she had to be red on each of the pages as clearly as possible. If I had her as a sort of striped gray tabby, she would have disappeared on half the pages, and I didn't want that to happen. So that's why a cat, and that's why a little black cat.
And you can look for it on every single spread, right?
Cover included as well. So yeah, both covers.
But you mentioned, you had these more difficult scenes, scenes in the hospital, or scenes, that scene of why we did what we did, why everyone went inside. And so I know from our conversations that you had pulled some of those, all those stories from real life people in real life, either news or stories shared by friends. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that, about your process in deciding what to put in the book, and also, what it was like to illustrate those scenes?
So you have to. I mean, you remember this, but I'm telling all you out there with coffee. This was happening during lockdown. This was happening, I want to say, within 3 or 4 weeks after lockdown happened in California is when I contacted you with the idea and
Mm-hmm.
completed the book over the next 6 weeks, right? It went
Yeah.
from thumbnails to finish within 6 weeks. And I had to, and it wasn't just me. I keep saying I, but I felt like it was a we. At this point, the minute I introduced the idea to Connie, it became the publishing house. Like
Yeah.
everybody could feel people supporting behind this and throwing in their ideas and mentioning this. Or Connie would say, "Yeah, some of my friends were commenting about this spread or that,"
Yep.
and I realized this is not me telling a story. This is we. This is all of us. All I am doing is I'm the instrument to document this particular time of what's going on. And so, sort of with that in mind, I knew that I was just absorbing as much information as I could from everybody at the same time. So I went to Facebook right away, and I went to Instagram, and I started going through people's images and their stories, and finding out
Mm-hmm.
who was sick and who wasn't, and I was surprised with the number of people within my own circle who had been affected by this,
Yeah.
and a couple of people I'd known whose parents had died or had very close to death. And I realized I have to gather all of this stuff quickly.
Yeah.
And it was quickly not just for the deadline, but it was for my own sense of sanity. You can't spend that much time absorbing these these news, these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there was the one spread I think that was the most painful to do was the hospital scene where and this one I know was an important spread that you wanted to put into the book, that you wanted to show what people were going through, like why we were trying to keep these workers safe. And
Yeah.
I remember going through just so much footage, and there was a lot of early on expose stuff where I remember a doctor, I think it was in Pennsylvania or I can't remember, New Jersey. She had taken a camera with her and she was documenting what was going on inside. And you're watching people literally duct taping plastic wrap onto the walls to isolate wards to keep people
Yeah.
know those wards. And
That
you
was,
see these rooms where elderly are being kept, and it's mostly the elderly, of course, are on these ventilating machines, and to put them into these rooms, I mean, in those days when they didn't quite know how to treat things,
yeah.
you basically went there and you were going to die. You had 3 or 4 days where you were in a plastic room and you were given an iPad, and your last connection to life were these amazing nurses who just did everything that they could to give hope to these
Yeah.
people at the end of their lives. And I think I watched that for maybe 3 or 4 days straight.
Hmm.
And I was trying to do it in a way that I was just pulling images. I was trying to make it as business-like as possible, but some of those images just are not going to leave me.
Yeah.
And um, gosh, many of them are in the spread. I think I talk about them in the back of the book, and it's still hard to talk about. But I think one of the more uplifting scenes, we're going to go for one of the uplifting ones, is in the spread of the hospital scene. You have an image of nurses, and there's a man outside, and he's holding up a sign, and it says, thank you for saving my wife's life. And that I think went viral for a little while, for 2 seconds there, where this man had he gone to the hospital and he posted the sign up, and the nurses were crying and they were snapping pictures, and I just
Yeah.
that's got to go at the very end of that spread. You have to see that moment, that
Yeah.
silver lining all this. This is why you're doing it, because of the chance that you'll survive this. And those are the moments that were God, they were really hard to put in, and I still can't get over it. But I thought that they were important, right? They were important to put in, and they were important to see what it was that we were facing and how we were doing it, how well we were doing it, and how we were able to. These God, these nurses are just absolutely amazing.
You were able to take these scenes of grief and wrap them in hope. And I thought you did it so well that you didn't shy away from the darkness of what this means, of why we're trying to stay distanced and be safe. Um, and you put the humanity on top. Even in moments of sadness, there was humanity, and that equals hope. And I thought that was just done so beautifully, but also really honestly. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry you have to draw those and research that, because it's an emotional toll, And I know you mentioned in your author's note that you usually draw the world in the way you want to see it, rather than the way it is. And this is a departure from that. So, can you tell us a little bit more about what that felt like and how that was different for you, for your creative process, and how you approached this book?
Yeah, it is funny. I mean, being a children's book illustrator, you would hardly assume that we're one of the more, in depth. We think about the world in such dark notes. No, not at
Yeah.
all. Um, I think though that this was the first time I like to say it's a documentary of what was happening while it was happening.
Hmm.
And in a way, it was my defense mechanism. It was my way of processing what I was seeing and putting out in a way that I'm familiar with. Um, but I think now, looking back at the book and having finished it, stepped away from it, I can still see where the children's book person needed to come out. And every image that starts off with despair ends with hope. Like, the
Hmm.
book moves constantly towards the idea that we are going to be better people because of all this at the end. We will be weaker, we will be sicker, we will, all these things will have happened to us, but we will come out better in the end for it. And um, that is always the message in children's books, right? There's always that hope that you want to give children. We are responsible for making the world a better place. And it's funny because while this was going on, and there were the elections going on, and there was the splitting of America, and there was the Black Lives Movement,
Yeah.
and more fracture occurring, I just kept thinking, like, at the heart of who we are, not just as Americans but as humans, like, we care for each other. Isn't that the idea? Like, that's evident not in the way I depicted it, but in
Hmm.
the way that the world actually did react. Those are the stories that don't necessarily get on the news, but I feel like I want to believe this is where faith steps in. I want to believe that
Yes.
that's how we all are. That
Yeah.
at the heart of it, we want to help each other. We want to care for each other, and um, and so in that way, this book is no different than any other book that I've done because the the world, in a sense, at some point lived up to my expectations of it, lived up to my hope that that they delivered in that idea of this perfect, not a perfect world, but this children's world that you act good, you be good, the
Yeah.
world is a better place. I'm sorry, I'm sort of stumbling through at this point now I really want my coffee.
Yeah. No, no, no. I just, you have no coffee, and I told you to go back in time to explore that really tough time when you were trying to illustrate those spreads. It's just something interesting you brought up about illustrating or creating this book like it's a time capsule and capturing time as is. And so, I guess as we head into my last question, it's about what it was like to try to end the book. And again, we were back in, April, May, June, and it was unclear what the timeline was. Like that, around the time you delivered the book was around the time when we realized, oh, this is going on. Remember? And then we discussed, does the ending make sense? And we have this glorious like spring will come, but it's not literal, right? Is it? Just elaborate a bit more on what it was like to try to find an end to an ongoing experience.
I, you're right. When we wrote it, when it was done, when it was finished, we were thinking we had like 2 or 3 more months of this, and then it would be all over.
Yeah,
Um, and I don't think that ending was hard to write in that way. I think the ending is hard to explain now, but
yeah,
at the time of creating it, it everything has to end with hope, and it was the perfect metaphor, right? It started off
yeah,
with winter had come and this was happening and everything turned gray, and the metaphor has to end with spring arrives, and hope springs eternal, and that's going to remain true. And I still think of it as, well, I mean, if we're talking literally what's happening in spring, the vaccine's starting to roll out now, and in spring hopefully it'll at least have reached all the medical workers and the elderly and the people who need it. But spring is going to come, and this isn't going to take us down. This Every single disease out there, every single pandemic that's happened has ended, and in that sense, the story ends well because it does end with hope. It does end with, no matter what spring we're talking about, spring is definitely going to come. And it never says specifically spring is here. It just says it will come.
yeah.
And I feel like for a book, especially a book that should be read in the future, that's spring never comes. Spring is always on the cusp. And that's what we sort of live for, is the hope of what's happening.
For sure, for
Oh,
sure. It's ends with a message that is applicable to all times of challenges, if not
yeah.
pandemic, personal ones, shared ones of all kinds. So, well, Wen, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you, Coffee Talk participants, for joining us and watching Wen and I tear up at each other as we talked about this book. And someday spring will come, Wen, and I'll be able to see you in person again. And all of us, hopefully, will be able to see each other in person again. So, to wrap up, I just want to share a few pieces of information. You can follow Wen on Instagram at Win, Lose, or Draw. And she's very clever. It's at at UYEN, Lose or Draw. So you can go there for more information about her books and more news about her, including info about Outside Inside. And you can also follow Mac Kids School and Library on Twitter at MacKidsSL for more ALA Midwinter updates, book news, and more. So we hope you enjoy the rest of the ALA Midwinter meeting. Thanks for joining us. Be well, stay safe. Wen, do you have any parting words?
No, thank you so much. And whatever, I'm so happy that this book made it out to the world. And remember, this is not my story. It's sort of the story of the world. And I hope it can be used as a device in classes and libraries around, as a way to start having conversations with kids about this in a meaningful way. So thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.